Hi, everyone. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Linda Miller, and I would like to welcome you to our program. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, and I will try to speak very loudly. Tonight's speaker is Pomfret resident Leo Tucker, and he's been fascinated with history since he was an elementary school student. For the past 35 years or so, he has continued this passion as a Revolutionary War reenactor. Having served in the Marines from 1967 to 1972 and in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970, he chose as his topic for us the Marines and Navy in the Revolutionary War. So before I turn the program over to Leo, I just want to remind you we do have a donation box at the back of the room, so don't forget as you head out the door. So welcome, everybody. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
If anyone can't hear me, let me know. Start with, the Navy was formed in October the 16th, I believe it was, of 1775. In November of 1775, the 10th of November, the Marines were formed for fighting soldiers aboard the naval ships. The Navy originally started out with 7 ships, the largest of which was the Alfred. The Alfred was an old trade ship. It wasn't a warship. And according to my readings about it, it wouldn't sail, it wouldn't weir, and it took half the Atlantic Ocean to turn it around. So it was not a warship by any means. Most of our other ships that we used at that time were either sloops or brigantines. A sloop is a smaller ship. Brigantine is about the same size, but it's a different sail setup. Not a sailor, so I couldn't explain that one to you. Those ships were used by us. The only problem we had with the American Navy was there were 3 navies forming in this area at the same time. Every state had a state line navy. Everybody who had enough money was buying ships and turning them into privateers, legal pirates. And then we had our 7 little ship Navy that was paying $12 a month and a pair of shoes if you joined. And we were having a hard time getting sailors. They were making more. They were getting more prize money from the privateers. The states were paying more money. So we're trying to figure out how we were going to get them back and get sailors. Well, prior to the Revolutionary War, the navies of the world had done away, except England, had done away with the rum ration. They had gone to grog. You got 1 pint of grog per day. Now, grog is a mixture of wine, rum, and water in equal parts. The rum is blackjack molasses rum. It's about 110 proof. The wine was more vinegar than it was wine because it was bought cheap for the sailors. And that the water was that wonderful pine taste because it was stored in pine hogsheads, big barrels that were made of pine. So you mixed that wonderful flavors together and you had grog. So somebody came up with a bright idea. We would bring back the rum ration. 1 guild of rum a day, both of these. As a captain of a ship, if you did something wrong, I could take half of it away. I could not take it all away. Your contract states that you will have spirits every day. Without it, we're in breach of contract. This flag you see here, the snake across the stripes, is the first battle flag of the United States Navy that flew during the Revolutionary War and still flies today when we're in combat. It is the oldest continuous flying flag in the United States military. The flag here is the first flag we used during the Revolutionary War. It's called the Grand Union. At that time, we did not want to be independent. We wanted our rights as Englishmen under the Magna Carta. So that's why they kept the Union Jack in the corner of the 13 stripes for the 13 colonies. It was when the Declaration of Independence came out, other flags started coming out. This one kind of fell into disfavor, but it was used by the Navy all the way through the war, except for John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones had an American flag with 13 6-pointed stars on a blue field, not in a circle, but on a field with a 13 stripes that Benjamin Franklin had made for him in France, and he flew that. The Navy had, like I said, 7 ships to start with. Along the line, we picked up more. We captured some British ships. By 1780, we had a frigate. The Warren was named after Dr. Warren, who was killed at Bunker Hill. And unfortunately, that one ended up burned in the Penobscot River during the Penobscot fiasco, in a raid on Penobscot. So it ended up being burned. The Marines formed on November 10th, 1775, and have been in existence ever since. This year is our 250th anniversary for the Marine Corps. At the end of the war, they sold all of the ships and disbanded the Navy. But they took the Marines and put them on flatboats on the rivers to protect against pirates and Indians, because the rivers at that time were our superhighways. So they stayed in existence. During Washington's second term, the Army decided they were going to overthrow the Congress and make him king, whether he liked it or not. Well, word got to him, and he disbanded the Army. So at that point, there were about 110 or 12 Marines that were our total force in the United States. So we have been in existence constantly. The uniform for the Marine. The Navy had, basically they wore what we call slops. They're basically these without any bands on them. They just hang, and they were loose so you could climb and stuff much more easily. And they wore just like almost like a t-shirt we wear today, only it was 3/4 length sleeve. The Marines were originally, the order stated that all our uniforms would be, our regimental uniforms would be moss green with natural white facings. Okay, moss green. Interesting. What is moss green? It took me 5 years to find out. And I found an original waistcoat, winter waistcoat, that had been made for the first Marine who was ever killed, and he never wore it. And it was in his sea chest that they found in Maine. It's now in the Augusta Museum at the Maine State Museum. My wife and I scooted up there. I got there late in the afternoon. They were closing down. I got a hold of the curator. He was great. He came in, he opened the case, because they have it in a case where light won't bother it and this type of thing. Opened the case and let us look at it, and even let my wife pull gently at the seams to see, you know, how it was sewn and this type of thing. And we got pictures. So that's how we came up with this color, the dark green. White facing. As an officer, I wear silver buttons with a fouled anchor on them. I wear a tri-cornered hat. I wear it straight forward. Jump to the Army real quick. If you were an Army soldier, you wear it this way. And the reason for that is every time you put a musket on your shoulder, you knock it off if it were this way. That's why it's called a cocked hat, because it's cocked off to the side. White small clothes, waistcoat, shirt's made of linen, waistcoat is made of linen, my breeches are made of linen, my stockings are made of cotton, because I am well-to-do, I can afford that. Believe it or not, cotton was one of the more expensive fabrics at that time. Linen was the cheapest, wool, and then cotton, because all cotton had to be imported. We had nobody here that was making cotton. And then for shoes, I have the standard shoes covered with what's called spatterdashers. These spatterdashers, trying to run away on me. Spatterdashers are made of wool, or well, actually it was made of sail canvas, which sail canvas in the 18th century is hemp. Sails were all made of hemp cloth. It doesn't rot, it's strong, and it was cheap. So these were made of sail canvas. They button down the side. They help keep sand, water, and this type of thing from getting into my shoes. If I should step in a puddle and step out quickly, it'll come up on this and run out rather than going over into my shoes or putting sand or pebbles into my shoes. They're called spatterdashers back then. Okay. Now the other coat I have, this regimental, is an enlisted man's coat. Same basic coat, except it's raw edged. All my edges are finished. These are just sewn together. There's no finishing on them. Most enlisted coats, regardless of where you were, whether you were in an Army unit or what, were raw edge. They were thrown together in a hurry and as cheaply as they could. The enlisted man wore the round hat cocked up on the right-hand side for the musket and was used by them. Problem with this is you're in the fighting tops and the wind's blowing and it goes flying off. So they would tie them down with a ribbon under their chin to keep them on their head. I did the same thing with usually with my tricorn. Now the tricorn has feathers in the side of it. Now, I'm not a dandy. They're not there for that. They're there so my men in the fighting tops will recognize it. It's always on the right-hand side and always white. Hopefully they won't shoot me. Today, Marine Corps officers have what's called a quadrifoil on top of their dress cover. It looks like a rope. It almost looks like a four-bladed propeller that's embroidered on the top of the cap. That is the feather that we had in the 18th century. Every man carried what was called a haversack. This is just a bag. You put everything in. Your food, extra socks, extra flints for your musket tools, all this stuff all went in this bag. Unless you were lucky enough that you'd gotten a hold of something else along the line. But that was the standard. As an officer, I wear one. It's a little fancier than the others. And in that I carry my possibles, the stuff I need. My silverware would be in there for eating. Because as an officer, I use a fork. Enlisted men use spoons in their fingers. Because the fingers were in, the fork was the devil's tool. Because the fork in the 18th century was either two-tined, like a pitchfork, or three-tined, like a pitchfork. So it was called the devil's tool. And most people wouldn't eat with it. Only your higher class people tended to live with it. Now on board ship, regardless of Marine or Navy, there was rules run by the captain. The captain was God on board a ship. He was the man who was in charge. What he said went, and nobody argued with him. If you permitted some kind of discretion on board his ship, he could give you punishment as doing extra duty. He could take away part of your grog ration. He could fine you, or he could consign you to the lash, the cat o' nine tails. The British Navy believed heavily in flogging. The American Navy didn't do it that much. There were some captains who were more apt to than others. John Paul Jones had 2 men flogged in the entire time he was on board his ships as captain. This one is a replica of an original naval cat. You'll notice it's not leather. Leather rots on board ship. Hemp rope doesn't. But everybody says, hey, it's rope. No authority. Each one of these tails has a musket ball in the end of it. Musket ball weighs 3/4 of an ounce. So each one of these has a 3/4 ounce weight in the end of it. There's 2 of them. They're stored in the captain's cabin in a red bag. If you're on deck doing holy stone in the deck, which is rubbing it down with a sandstone block, or cleaning or doing something and complaining about your lot in life on board the ship, and the bosun walks by and bumps you with his knee and says, "Don't let the cats out of the bag." That's where the term comes from. Don't let the cats out of the bag. You could be given up to 100 lashes from 2 whips, 1 from each side, 50 on each side. 100 lashes with this whip would leave bare bone on the back. 100 lashes normally was fatal. Where you read in the Army, you guys get 2 and 3 and 400 lashes and walk away from it. Yeah. The people who swing the whips in the Army are the drummer boys. 13, 14, 15-year-old boys. Now, I'm not saying they ain't got some muscle on them, but they're not the bosun with arms like this, So usually if you had to flog a man to the point where he was going to be useless, they would go the whole trip. rather than have to deal with him. They just flog him until he died. That way they could just bury him overboard and continue on their way, because he was going to be useless for the rest of the trip from recovering from this. They also had what was called keel hauling, which had been done away with just prior to the Revolutionary War. And the reason it was done away with is because people were surviving it. It was supposed to be a death sentence. They tied a rope to your feet and a rope to your hands. They took you up, dropped you off the bow of the ship, and dragged the rope back to the widest part of the ship in the beam, and then they dragged you across the underside of the hull. Of course, the hull is all covered with barnacles and this type of thing, and corroded from being at sea. And if you know anything about barnacles, they're like little razor blades, and they cut. And they usually, if you didn't die from that, you died from the sharks that came after you when you started bleeding. But they had people starting to survive this thing. So they did away with it. The only other form of punishment there was, other than the cat and the standard, was hanging from the yardarm. And men have actually committed suicide to avoid it. If you were hung by the yardarm, you don't get dropped through a trap. You don't get stood on a ladder and kicked off. You get a rope put around your neck, and 3 good men grab it and haul you up to the yardarm. And you dance there till you strangle to death. So it was a very, very vicious form of killing a man. And usually only used if a man had committed murder on board the ship, had struck a senior officer, or got stealing from the crew. And then usually the crew demanded it. Or if you got caught stealing from the crew, they would put you through a gauntlet. They would line the entire crew up around the deck, and then they would put a big, thick, wide belt around your kidney line. 2 Marines would walk behind you with swords, keeping you moving, and they could hit you with anything they wanted to hit you with as you went around that gauntlet. Because you were stealing from them, especially if you were stealing food. You were stealing from the crew. You weren't stealing from the captain. You weren't stealing from that. You were stealing from the crew. So the crew was given the ability to give you the punishment. They could strike you with whatever they wanted, as hard as they wanted. So on here I have some weaponry used. This is Marine, obviously. This sword here is a naval cutlass. This is an 18th century naval cutlass. It is just a plain butcher's weapon. It is not for sword fighting. It's for hacking and chopping. This one is another one. This is the Marine's sword. We all carried these. Originally was a British Grenadier, French and Indian War Grenadier era sword. Again, it's heavy. We're not taught to sword fight with it. It's another chopping weapon. You cannot imagine a hell on earth until you've been on the deck of a ship in the middle of a battle and a boarding party. On land, you get into a battle, you start to lose. You got a place to run away. On board a ship, 80 feet long, 25 feet wide, and that's your battlefield, and there's nowhere to go. You're belly to belly with your enemy, hacking, chopping, using boarding axes, using knees, using pistols to defeat your enemy. Now, here, the bayonet. The standard brown bess bayonet. It's 16 inches long. It's tri-cornered for strength. Pinpoint. Goes on the end of the musket. Now, we use them in boarding parties mainly, or as guard duty on board ship for the Marines. And we used the British sea musket. Shorter than the standard brown bess by about a foot, a little over a foot. Still 75 caliber, which is 3/4 of an inch, basically. It's another, again, a 1 ounce ball of lead comes out of the muzzle of this thing. You would bite off the cartridge, which I have. Where did I put it? There it is. This is an oversized cartridge. I'll explain it real quick. Here, you would have your gunpowder, and there's your ball. You would bite off the end, prime the pan, pour the rest down the barrel, spit the ball down the barrel, because you bit the ball off, and then ram it down. Then when you were ready, you would put it in your shoulder and point it, basically, because there's no sights on this. The bayonet lug is the front thing. When the spark falls, it fires through the pan, through the vent, into the barrel, and fires it out the end. Ah.
Oh, dear.
Got me. This, as you can see, is much shorter. The brown bess is like that much. Actually, tell you short. Yeah, it comes up to here on me. So this sea musket was much easier to handle, climbing the rat lines, getting into the tops, and this type of thing than the long musket was. Early in the war, when we first started the Marines, they got everything. No, I'm fine. Got everything from the committees of safety. And we had everything from blunderbuss, fowling pieces, shotguns. You couldn't believe, including wall guns, which a wall gun is a small cannon that's on a long barrel like a musket. 1 and 2 inch diameter barrel. And they look like a rifle or a shotgun. And they used those in the fighting tops to blast like a duck gun across at the enemy. I think we got it, more or less. Okay. The other weapon I have here is a British boarding pistol. This is 69 caliber. I would carry anywhere from 6 to 8 of these when I boarded. You haven't got time to reload. You cock, you fire, you cock, you just drop it, pick up the next one and fire again. And when I got to the end, this was the last one, I have a sword in one hand, and this with the brass bound butt in the other. It has a clip to go on the belt. We didn't have holsters back then. It goes this way on the belt. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention of our uniform, the term leatherneck for Marines comes from the 18th century when they wore this. It's a leather stock. This one's a little thinner than normal. It was worn around the neck to protect against sword slash, bayonet point, and pike point, and this type of thing. They would make it, cut it to fit you. You would put it on, so make sure it fit right, and it would be boiled in seawater. Let cool, and you put it on and wear it till it dried. And it would form fit to your neck. That's why this stays like that. It doesn't flop around. Enlisteds were black. Officers were white. I'll pass this around so you folks can take a quick look if you want at how comfortable those would be around your neck. Had one gentleman who wrote, one gentleman who wrote that he had been in the Marines for 5 years during the Revolutionary War, had not been able to look at his shoes without bending over since. Oh, come out of here. So I will give you a hint. You can't bend over, you've got to do this to see your shoes. So another weapon used by the Marines, this is my officer's sword, by the way. You set them here. This is my officer's sword. Yeah, this one, just set them there. Thank you, sir. The officer's, I could carry any sword I wanted. This sword is a Lowland Scott sword. It's triangular in shape, sharp only for the first foot, with a needle point. This sword was designed to take on the Highland broadsword, the claymore, and not break. Most swords would break at the strike of a claymore. This one won't. It's light, it's fast. The claymore would come through, you could get under and stab or slash with the tip. So I figured if it would stand up to a broadsword, it would stand up to a cutlass, which is the Navy's idea of one. They all had white belts that we would wear with our sword in it around our waist. The enlisted men all wore cartridge boxes. Inside here would be their powder and shot. It's a fuse case, and this is for cleaning the vent. Only a half go. There it is. Cleaning the vent and cleaning the pan. Because if you don't keep them clean, they won't fire. The one thing about muskets and black powder flintlocks is if they'll fail, they will. They are noted for that. This fuse case, the fuse case was made to light grenades. There would be a burning slow match. This is a piece of slow match right here. It's just cotton rope soaked in saltpeter. And it burned very slowly and very hot. And you could put this through the hole, light it, and then throw it. By this time, the grenadiers no longer threw grenades. The famous British, French, whatever grenadiers, no longer threw grenades. They made their own fuses. No fuse burned at the same rate. So they go off here, they go off over there, so they quit doing it. What we did is lengthen the fuse from throwing them from ship to ship. It was one of these thrown by a private of Marines from the yard onto the Serapis during the battle between the Serapis and the Bahama Richard that went off below deck and started a fire next to the powder magazine that caused them to surrender. Now, 3 units of Marines in 1776 into 77 were assigned to Henry Knox's artillery. Marines served on artillery on board ship, so they figured if they could hit something on a bobbing ship, they ought to be able to hit something on land. Washington loved the Marines because at Assumption Creek, at the Second Battle of Princeton, they broke the British Grenadier line. 112 of them broke a battalion line by using a boarding wedge. Formed into a wedge and went right straight through the middle, turned this way and pushed it, and a whole unit of Maryland troops went behind them. So he loved them, but the problem was they wouldn't take orders from anybody but their own officers. So what he did is he ended up sending all 3 of them to Henry Knox in the artillery, and they served with the artillery through that year and a half. I have a mini artillery piece here. I have one, but I didn't bring it. This is a replica actually of the gun I have, a 6-pounder. It was loaded from the muzzle. Cartridge went down inside a linen bag with the powder in it. Behind that was whatever you were firing, whether it was solid shot, which you usually didn't out of a 6-pounder, or grape shot, which this is a grape shot. It's about 1.25 inch ball, weighs about 2.5 ounces. And once that was all in there, then you picked the vent, you put a goose, you didn't pour powder down the vent like Hollywood loves to show. You put a goose quill down through it, it was full of fine milled powder. And that's how you fired it, with a piece of slow match in a linstock. And that would fire almost instantaneously. If you put it down, if you were out of them and you still had to fight, yes, you could do that. You could pour powder down the vent. But it'd take almost 30 seconds for the thing to go off, because it can only burn the top powder. Whereas in the goose quill, you got air going all the way through, and it just shoots right through. This is a scale. One thing about artillery, by the way, that the Army, any Army had problems with, is the fact you had to be literate to be an artilleryman. To be an officer in the artillery, you had to be able to do geometry, you had to be able to do algebra, trigonometry, and you had to be totally literate, because you had to deal with angles and so forth. So much powder to so much angle. Now this one here is designed, you put it down the barrel, and you elevate the barrel, and it tells you how far that barrel will shoot. And it also tells you how much powder. If you're using it in a mortar, you set it in this way, and it tells you the angle for the mortar. Have here a compass, small compass, my telescope, and I have money. Now, money in the 18th century, we're in good shape, was strange. We had no money of our own to start with. And of course, when the war started, the British weren't giving us any more. So we were using what British money we had gathered, but didn't have any. So one of our biggest suppliers of money was actually the Spanish, because they were making money down in South America, called a real. 1 full ounce of silver. It's called a real, or a Spanish dollar. This was the coin we used most. And actually, we counterfeited it very well. As long as it was an ounce of silver, it didn't matter. Now, the thing about this coin is it's also the smallest coin we had. So if I'm going to go into a store and buy, let's say I'm buying some tobacco, and it's 50 cents, I'm not going to give them $1 for it. So what are we going to do? They had a thing, it looked almost like a paper cutter, and they put it in there and they would cut it in half. Now around the outside of this one's pretty beat up from age, but around the outside of it there used to be little lines. There's 100 of them around the outside of this, and the French word for them is cents. So there's 100 cents in a dollar. If you want to make sure you didn't shortchange you counted the cents to make sure there were 50. Now, if I want something else, I went to another store and I bought some black ball for my shoes, which is shoe polish, named for shoe polish in the 18th century. And it was 25 cents. I would give him the half dollar. He would cut it in half, and you would have a quarter of a dollar. Or then I would go in and buy something trivial, and it would be 12.5 cents. And they cut this in half. I now have what is called a bit. 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, a dollar. Now later, we started making our own real, our own silver dollar, has the 13 colonies linked on the back, join or die, and some reason it has a Florida scene on the front. I've never quite figured that out, but $1 currency it says. And this was, again, an ounce of silver, and again, it was a piece of 8. You could cut it up. That's the other name for this, by the way. This is a piece of 8, because it could be cut into 8 pieces. But the Army, being the fact that the Army didn't get paid very often, they didn't have much money. So a lot of times after a battle, you'd see guys running around cutting buttons off, because buttons were made of pewter or silver, or gold, depending on if they're officers or not, and they could be used as money, because buttons were getting very hard for the public to get their hands on. That's why you see in the 18th century, you see a lot of horn buttons and this type of thing being used, because they can't get the metal buttons anymore. So these, they could take these and trade them in for a drink. This one's a silver officer's button. They could probably drink all night on it. But don't get caught with buttons missing from your uniform. Because if you lost a button off your uniform, you immediately came to your officer or your sergeant and said, "Sir, I lost this, I can't find it." That way, when you came to formation the next day and it was missing, you weren't flogged because you were selling your buttons. We have about 20 minutes. If anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer if I can. Yes?
Go get the microphone. Just a moment. So I've always wondered why the tri-cornered hat. What purpose does it have?
Three-cornered hat was a European style. It came in. I'm not sure. I think it was the Germans who first brought it into being as a military hat. It started as a civilian hat, which has a much longer forward beak on it than these do. And I believe it was the Germans who first started using it originally for their grenadiers, and then later went to the like the bearskin for grenadiers. Although over here the bearskin was very rarely ever seen. Most of them wore a the three-cornered hat, or if they were with the Burgoyne campaign, they cut down the hats and made them into Burgoyne hats. They call them. They look almost like helmets, but they were still made of the same material, because they were knocking them off their heads every time and being in the brush up here. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
No, it's Pat. Start.
I have in my head that at one time up in Jones, I saw a plaque, and it said something about a Navy. Do you know?
You're talking about Whitehall, New York.
Okay.
Whitehall, New York claims to be the home of the Navy. Well, it was the home to Benedict Arnold's Navy, because Benedict Arnold formed his own fleet on Lake Champlain in 1776 to stop the British from coming down Lake Champlain. Battle of Valcour Island and so forth, and they did turn the British back. But that was not the U.S. Navy. It was never given constitutional credit. It was never a constitutional thing like the one in October of '75 that said they would form a Navy. Yes, sir.
Wait.
Okay, so the Declaration of Independence wasn't until 1776.
Right.
So whose Navy was it in 1775?
It was Continental Navy.
Continental Congress they reported to
It
that?
was never, it didn't become the U.S. Navy until I think it was 79 or 80 that they changed it to U.S. Navy or United States, because you started seeing U.S. on the buttons of the American Army troops at that time, and they changed it to U.S. Navy. Marines was always Continental Marines. They never changed it until after the Revolutionary War. And when they brought back the Navy in 82, I think it was, when they had the frigate Navy they were forming with the Constitution and all that, they brought the Navy back, they brought the Marines back, and they became U.S. Marines at that time. The United States Marine Corps itself did not form until after World War I, and that was because of a fight between the Navy and the Army over us. Any others?
I have one more question.
Okay.
So who was manufacturing like the bags?
These?
Yeah, that's,
Well, there are groups out there that we call sutlers that make these things. These are made actually in India.
now, but who was making it back at?
But this bag was made, actually came out of Pennsylvania. I'm not sure exactly where it's made, but there's a company there that makes several different designs of this.
I mean, at the time of the war.
Oh, at the time of the
Yeah.
war, they were made by leather makers. They had guys, we weren't allowed, that was one of our problems over here. And it's never really mentioned as much in history as the taxes and all this stuff. We were not allowed guilds here, if you know what a guild is. But in Europe, people who did the same thing formed into organizations to make it. Whether it was pottery, whether it was mattresses, whether it was rope, or whether it was leather work, pewter work, silver work, they had, and they set their prices and this type of thing. We were not allowed to have them. As a matter of fact, you were a member of a guild, you couldn't come here because they're afraid they'd starve them. So these were usually made by people who'd learned their craft here. You got to remember, we were third or fourth, and in some cases fourth generation here. Most of the men who fought in the Revolutionary War had never seen England. They were born and raised here, and they learned to do this here. But all of this is reproduction. There's nothing here that's original. And there are companies out there that manufacture this for us, going through all the history. I mean, you can go back medieval all the way up into Vietnam, and they are reproducing stuff now. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Oops, wait, Dennis.
Thank you, Leo. Can you just tell us a little bit about your reenactments and what you guys do? And
Okay, yeah. Reenactments. A reenactment is actually done where something happened, like at Hubbardton every year. In Hubbardton, Vermont, the only battle fought in the state of Vermont was fought in Hubbardton, up near Castleton. Every year they recreate one part of that battle. We go to a town green and put on a display and demonstration. Everybody calls it a reenactment. It's actually a demonstration of tactics, and so because nothing ever happened there to reenact. But we're doing basically the same thing. We go in, we demonstrate tactics, we demonstrate the clothing, how it's worn, how they lived, difference between an enlisted man and an officer. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever seen Rev War tentage, but the enlisted men's tent's what's called a wedge tent. It comes down in a V. It's about, well, I guess 4.5, 5 feet tall, about 6 inches long. Some of them have flat ends, some have what's called a bell on them, and up to 6 men slept in that tent. Whereas an officer, as a married officer, if my wife traveled with me, I would be in something maybe like a 12 by 16 wall tent. I would have a bed, I would have furniture, I would have silverware and china. I would live the same there as I lived at home. That didn't work out real well with the Continental Army as it went along, because baggage got lost, got stolen, got captured, and there were times that officers were really glad to have a wedge tent to crawl into. But that's what we do. We try to teach history. Unfortunately, today we are not teaching history in our schools the way it was taught when we went to school. My son went to high school, he went to Woodstock, and during the time that they studied American history, they studied one war, and that was the Revolutionary War. After that, everything was the economic side. The Civil War, 1812, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II. All of it came from the economic side. No mention of the men who were the heroes of those wars. that gave their lives, the ones that did fantastic things and ended up winning the Medal of Honor. You know, and that's one of the reasons my son is not a teacher, by the way, is because of that. But anyways, like I said, that's what we do. We try to teach everyone, not just the young people. I mean, I go and do school programs, and I'll walk in with a map of the 13 colonies. Nothing on it, just a map in their outline. I'll hand them out and I'll say, put the colonies where they belong. If I have one, I'm lucky. You know how many people think New Hampshire is Vermont, and vice versa? I went to Castleton and did a talk at Castleton. And my first question was, where was the only battle fought in the state of Vermont in the Revolutionary War fought? And 3 or 4 hands went up, and I called, of course, first one was Bennington. And I'm like, well, that's wonderful, except Bennington was fought in Hoosick, New York. It wasn't fought in Bennington. And hands all went down, and nobody came up. And finally I said, well, it's right here in Hubbardton. And one guy says, wow. He said, I should know that. I said, why is that? He said, I lived there. Lived in Hubbardton and didn't know there was a Revolutionary battle on the main road going to his town. But anyway, like I said, they're not teaching history like they used to. If it's not on a test, they don't teach it, at least not like they used to. So it's important that we go out and do this. And it's also important that these kids get to see how these people lived. Because I'm dressed fine. A lot of our reenactors dress down. They have torn coats with patches on them, and their breeches have patches on them, and all that, you know. I mean, we have to keep it within reason. I mean, there were times all they had was a blanket to wrap around them. And they get to see the hardship that these guys lived on. Guys out there cooking a chicken they stole from the farmer on a shovel over a fire because they don't have anything to cook with other than a shovel. Or pieces of it stuck on the end of a ramrod over a fire, or on their bayonet to cook because they didn't have any pots or pans. So this is what we do in all eras. I mean, it's not just Revolutionary War. I also do a World War II presentation of Marines in the Pacific Theater with my son, and I also do a Vietnam presentation. And I have a fellow who works with me that actually does a Vietnam field hospital with me at the same time. So we do all eras. We have to go back to medieval, ancient. I have a friend of mine who does Mycenaean. You know, you can't go back, I don't think, much further than that. And Roman. A lot of guys do Civil War. 1812, up here near the lakes, you see a lot of that around that time of year. Other than that, you don't see a lot of it. World War I, there's a huge World War I reenactment community out there. Huge World War II. Vietnam is getting bigger now to what it used to be. I mean, when I first started, there was like 3 or 4 of us doing Vietnam, period. Now there's probably, I would say, over 100 that are doing some form of Vietnam, whether it's Army, Marine, Navy, or whatever. So yeah, that's what we do. Any others? Yes?
I always have found it interesting, the history of how we had all of these different forces at the I need the mic. How we've had all these different forces during the Revolutionary period, you know, with the colonies forces, and we had the militias, and we had the continental units, and then with the Navy it's even more complex because you have the privateers, and eventually we end up with basically, you know, in modern day now we have, you know, the U.S. forces and we've got the National Guard forces, and that's it.
Well,
but when did the privateers really phase out completely? I'm not.
You're talking about
sure.
The privateers for the Navy?
Yeah.
Actually, the privateers, the last privateers I've heard anything about were during the Civil War.
Okay.
I don't believe that after that they did privateering. But the Civil War, they still had privateers. War of 1812, they had privateers. The privateer Navy has been around ever since the modern navies formed. The British, the French, the Spanish, all of them had privateer navies. People that they gave what they called letters of marque, so they could go out and basically pirate from their enemy. They weren't allowed to attack anybody else, but let's say the English are fighting the Spanish, they could take Spanish ships under the letter of marque. But yeah, the last I have heard of any privateering done was the Civil War, and it wasn't a lot then, it was just some. Any others? No? All right, I thank you. I'm a little early. If you want to come up and look around, see what I got here, you're welcome to. I'll answer questions up here too if people have questions. And I thank you all for the evening.
Thank you.